Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Eric Zabiegalski, and we met through another guest that Angela Kodalesi Myers, and I reached out to him because she was interviewing him, Eric, and I'm watching Eric and Angela talk, and he's talking about this idea called organizational ambidexterity, and that's something, as an organizational person, I'd never heard that phrase before. And so while I'm watching this, I'm texting him on LinkedIn to invite him on the podcast, and so here you are. So welcome, Eric. I'm glad you're here. So what's up?
Well, thank you, Ed. I'm very honored to be on your show, and I want you to know that you reached out to me and we scheduled in enough time for me to do my homework. I've watched every one of your podcasts.
Wow.
And I've also watched the Ted Lasso series upon your recommendation. And I got to tell you, I don't know where the Eddie Network is going next, but I feel like in watching all of your podcasts and taking notes that I've gotten a bachelor's degree or maybe a master's degree in certain subjects. So, I don't know if the Eddie podcast is going to turn into Eddie University someday or some kind of teaching, but
all the guests
it's been very insightful.
The guests are the teachers.
Yeah, and I remember when I was going through my advanced degree, the guest speakers that we would have every week were they were the cherry on top of the sundae. They were the real treat. And you've got some real gems. I've taken notes, and I'm going to, once I coalesce all these notes, I'm going to send them to you, and I'm also going to use them to go back and start commenting on your different guest speakers with
okay,
the gems and nuggets that I pulled out.
Well, I really appreciate this, Eric, more than words can say, because one of the criticisms I've received is I'm posting too often. Twice a week is too often. We can't keep up with it. I say, well, that's okay. They'll always be there. I'm not taking them away. They're not going away. They'll always. But the idea was to create momentum and a sense of movement and a sense of energy about these topics. And there is no common. I'm not going out looking for people that have a particular topic to talk about. I'm actually just looking for people to talk to. And most of those people are people who were introduced to me by someone else. So it really is a demonstration of networking, and this is what is possible. But it's also a demonstration of how to talk with someone is the first time you ever meet. And so this conversation will be not only on the Eddie Network podcast, but it'll also be on the First Conversations playlist on YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is really great.
I love the emergent nature of your model and the podcasts. The idea that to keep an empty room mentally in your mind for what happens, the what ifs.
Yeah.
And the places that it goes will surprise you, probably pleasantly surprise you. More than the scripted plan that you might have planned out.
Empty room. That's a new one for me. Tell me what you see there. What does that mean to you? That this is an empty room?
Well, I think that cognitively, we should certainly plan out, abstractly map a structure and things that we want to do, but also keep an open mental space and empty room to you for what might happen and what you might put in there. If your if your day is scripted and then you execute that script every day, there's no room for the emergent and for discovery.
Okay, let's take that thought and morph it over to organizational ambidexterity and see how does that fit. How does this empty room podcast sort of thing fit into that world that you've been studying?
Yeah, great question. So the idea of organizational ambidexterity was first coined in 1975 by a guy named Robert Duncan. And Robert Duncan talked about it temporally or temporality. Um, he said that ambidexterity was the ability, organizational ambidexterity, to do two things simultaneously: to exploit the marketplace, learning to doing what you have learned to do well, and simultaneously explore and innovate and learn new things. This is very difficult for organizations to do because the two are antithetical. They can be at odds with one another. Um, but the ones who have learned to do it and do it well, companies like Toyota, uh, really have learned a remarkable system. So organizational ambidexterity is really at its heart a learning organization, and it's the most powerful type of learning organization there is. You know, there's we talk a lot in the organizational world about organizational learning, which is a big umbrella, and then under that is a learning organization. Those are two very different things. But that term organizational learning is really a dichotomy. It's kind of antithetical, um, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to do. Because if you're organizing, you are separating everything out into like piles, and if you're learning, you're pulling in everything there is. The aperture, in one case, the aperture is very narrow. In another case, the aperture is very wide. I'll give you an example. If you're organizing, you might cast a fishing net and pull in a bunch of fish. And when you're organizing, you separate the blue fish from the red fish. And when you're learning, you cast a net and catch as many fish as you can. So this idea of convergence and divergence, exploitation and exploration, is very difficult for companies to do. Now, there are three different types of ambidexterity that are practiced, and in 2020, I came up with a fourth type that I published about. Here's probably the most important thing about organizational ambidexterity research. So it's this idea that you can exploit in the marketplace for profit, performance, and market share, and also explore and innovate simultaneously. Almost 50 years of research says something very remarkable about this practice. It says that exploitation drives out exploration.
I would agree with that.
As you learn to do something well, we have a tendency to want to lather, rinse, and repeat on those processes, and we stop seeing and learning new things.
So what comes to mind is 3M Corporation, and how they continue to innovate, and they would discard or sell off mature products that they had so they could continue to innovate. I forget.
Yeah,
I think it was
and I heard that so we'll talk about the different types of ambidexterity in a moment, but I think the 3M Corporation requires that their engineers spend I think 15% of every work week doing unstructured activities.
Yeah.
Now, that could be sitting outside under an oak tree watching the flight trajectory of butterflies go by. It just has to be unstructured. So there's that exploration component that the organization is encouraging. Now, the types of ambidexterity, I told you about the first one, temporal ambidexterity. That's
Right.
when you switch and you switch back, every from an exploitive posture to an explorative one, and then you switch back again. Temporal ambidexterity can be doing a 1 week retreat every year with your company. It can be going to a company, it can be going to a conference. It could be tumblers of whiskey and playing pool in the boss's basement once a week. You switch and then you switch back again from exploitation to exploration. That's temporal. The second type of ambidexterity is called structural. These are examples are companies like Lockheed Martin, who has their Skunk Works division, or Boeing that has their Phantom Works, or Disney Pixar with their DreamWorks division. Structural ambidexterity is a designated place where it's okay to let your hair down, to be explorative. Now, the third type is called contextual ambidexterity, and I think that's the most powerful. That's when the ability to be ambidextrous goes all the way down to the individual member level. Now you are empowered to exploit and explore as you see fit. You can switch from, repeating those processes that you are tried and true and earn you money, to being explorative and innovative and then switching back again. So I think contextual ambidexterity, when it gets there, I say that it goes into the DNA of the company. They most often still have both of those first types, temporal ambidexterity and structural, but now they're contextual. In 2020, I wrote about a new kind of ambidexterity that I called conscripted or forced ambidexterity. This is kind of an evolve or die scenario where organizations were forced to change, were forced to stop their repeating exploitive processes and explore and innovate, or perhaps they would perish. In my consulting with large organizations, one example of this was telework. For decades, my industrial organizations that I consult for had given lip service to teleworking, but never really had done it. And when the pandemic hit, they suddenly had to push the I believe button and trust that telework would actually work. And it did.
Yeah.
But it took that environmental change, that revolutionary change, to being forced into doing it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this ambidexterity is something that operates on a spectrum, and what we really are wanting is to be somewhere in the middle range on that spectrum. Constantly focused on results, at the same time constantly focused on expansion and growth and new things, and that we're constantly kind of moving back and forth. Because I know in just listening to you describe this, I was feeling in me the need to push back against one and go the other way. It's like this podcast. This is an unscripted podcast because I'm pushing back against kind of the trend of podcasts being very scripted and very oriented and very processed and all that. I'm pushing back against that because I want it to be more open, where I felt like I think openness was something was needed instead of whatever it was before. So I'm wondering if that's that sense of emotional connection to what's happening in an organization drives people to want to, well, we're not making the results we need. And so what do we need to go do to improve our results over the next 30 days? And we can have that conversation, which in one sense could be an innovation kind of question, So I see this kind of movement back and forth, constantly trying to, not to reach a static point, but just recognize that we're always going to be in motion there.
Yeah. So the static point, homeostasis is death really in an organization. If you're not moving, you're not alive.
Right.
It's like Peter Bale said in talked about permanent whitewater. If you're in a kayak and everything's calm, you're getting pulled by an invisible current, so you better paddle like crazy.
Yeah.
To be ambidextrous, you have to have courage, and you have to have a completely different type of structure, and it takes different kind of leadership, and it takes different kind of learning, and it takes a different kind of culture. And if you don't have these things, you won't be ambidextrous, and the employees will know. Culture. Edgar Schein said, perhaps the single most important thing a leader does for their organization is set the culture. And I would agree with that. And I would add that if you don't do this, if you don't set the culture, you're going to get one anyway. And you may not like or even understand the culture that you have. And that's a dangerous situation to be in.
Well, I think, yeah, I agree. I think the assumption that there is a culture there, and if you're the CEO, you either join it or you seek to modify it. But you can't, if you assume that there is one and I'm going to go create something out of nothing, then you're going to be in trouble or pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're going to be in trouble. And employees can smell insincerity and inauthenticity, and they can detect it. They have a better sniffer or a BS meter for these kinds of things than leadership does, I think.
I totally agree. I have a little phrase that I've been using for a number of years now, that there's a persistent residual culture of values that persists because it resides in the relationships of the people. And if you can,
I heard that in a lot of your talks, and I completely agree, and I know where that's coming from. So Edgar Schein has a famous culture model that looks like a pyramid.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's depicted as an iceberg. So the very top of the pyramid, the point, are symbols and artifacts. That could be the boss's Maserati parked out front. It could be the leather furniture in the lobby of the organization. Symbols and artifacts are at the very top. It's what people mostly see.
Right.
Below that, the middle section are called espoused values. That's what the organization says, what their HR manual says, what their mission statement and slogan is. And then at the bottom part of that pyramid is something called underlying assumptions. That's the water cooler talk. That's what people are saying behind the scenes that are swinging the pickaxe at the coal face. And that's where that persistent, I think that's where those persistent values are that you talk about. And if there's an incongruence between the symbols and artifacts and the middle of the pyramid and the bottom, if there's not a congruency there, you're going to have problems.
So I've been looking at this stuff a long time, and I totally agree with what you're saying. It's exactly what I see. And one of the problems I had, I mean, we're going back 30, 40 years, was that perception by people in leadership that whatever that culture was that is represented there in the bottom part of Edgar Schein's pyramid, or represented by my my phrase, is somehow inauthentic or not of the company. That and it's rather something that needs to be um, diminished, because
Yeah.
I mean, I kept seeing that in places, and what I realized was, um, no, that's not the case. You know what those values are is why these people love the company.
Yeah. You know, you just gave me a new thought there. You're absolutely right. And that's horrible. If a company's trying to do that, I think it's tantamount to trying to give yourself cancer,
Yes,
because those underlying assumptions at the bottom, those long-term dedicated employees swinging the pickaxe at the coal face, they are the organization. So if there's an incongruency between the artifacts, symbols and artifacts, and the espoused values, and then what people are saying, the arrows are not going to go down from the top anymore. They're going to come up from the bottom. And leadership better, if those values are good, leadership better embrace those and change and not try to fight them, or they're going to have a fractured, fragmented culture.
I I agree, because it's not that the persistent residual values and relationships are always right. They're not always right. Sometimes they have a very badly constructed view of the company because of past experience, whether it was traumatic or there was some leader who was charismatic that they followed, and they must be loyal to this person even though this person's been gone for 10 years. You know, so I think
Yeah.
it's really the leadership of the company that must not just validate, okay, that's the values, but to say, let's talk about these values and remind ourselves of why these values are important.
Right. Understand, unpack and understand what you're thinking, because people don't know what they're thinking until they engage in a dialogue.
That's exactly right. You know, a number of years ago, I studied the um, the research of Pierre Clastres, who was a French anthropologist, and he looked at his field work was done in the Amazonian tribes, and I'll be really brief on this. So, what he discovered was that the chief of all these tribes were elected on an annual basis, and they had no power. They didn't have the power to say anything. They didn't have the power to make decisions or to force the tribe to do anything. Their job was to remind the tribe of who they are. And they were supposed to do that on a daily basis. This is who we are. These are our values. This is why we are who we are. And this is where we're going. And
I love that. I've heard you talk about that, and I love that idea. You know, a friend of mine who was on his podcast, and he introduced me. He gave me quite a compliment. He introduced me as a business philosopher and a practical mystic.
Ooh,
And I love that title, business philosopher.
yeah.
I think that business philosopher should be a position in organizations. I don't expect it to be one in my organization anytime soon, because they can't wrap their heads around it. They couldn't make sense of it. But that is a type of leadership, and that is something that needs to be considered. Another one, an example that has been created, but also kind of ruined, in my opinion, is something called the Chief Learning Officer. I don't know if you've heard of a CLO, or a Chief Learning Officer.
I have, yes.
This is a position, when done right, this is a position where learning has an equal position in the C-suite, at the boardroom table, alongside performance. and positions like the CFO. So learning is on an even keel with performance. But most of these companies and organizations didn't understand the spirit and the ethos of the chief learning officer and immediately put the CLO underneath the CRHO, the head of HR, and took their teeth out when they
Yeah.
first put them out, which is sad. But I heard one of your podcasters, I think that you made the comment that these are not malevolent actions. People don't mean to, throw a wrench in the works. They just don't have a concept of
Yeah. That's
what the right thing is to do.
well, it's not that there isn't malevolence out there, but I think most of us gets programmed because of living in a particular context for too long, and so we don't learn what's outside the context we're in, and that's I see that a lot. It's and maybe you have experienced this. What I have found is that, and I know there's some research out there about this, but men and women, professional men and women, when they enter into their 40s, begin to ask questions about the future of their lives and the future of their work, and whether they should continue doing what they've been doing for 20, 25 years. And so they're at this transition point, and it's a point of decision which is going to determine where the rest of their life is going to go. So it's packed with a lot of it. A lot is at stake in the decisions that they make. I would think that a company that is leaning towards learning would have a way of opening itself up to helping those employees, those people, those staff people, be able to deal with that in such a way that they can remain within the company and not to someone else. What do you think about that?
Well, that's an important thing you said, and I don't expect that we'll see this, but I'll hold it up. There's a model here with 3 triangles.
Yeah.
So in the first, if you can imagine, this is the life cycle of the ambidextrous organization. If you can imagine, the first triangle is upside down, and the company is mostly explorative. They're learning for something to put into the marketplace, or learning how to refine something they want to put into the marketplace. So this pyramid is upside down, explorative, and it's driving toward exploration at the point. Once they reach that exploitation at the point of the upside down pyramid, the model flips. Now it turns right side up. Now the organization becomes largely exploitive. They're lather, rinse, repeating on their products that they are dominating the market with, or providing to the market. And there's a little sliver of exploration at the bottom. This is usually new people that come into the organization, and everybody's very enamored and curious about them, and they're very energetic. They want to know more about Ed or Eric coming into the organization. Or temporal things happen. You go to a conference and you get all jazzed up about what you learned there. So the model in the middle is largely exploitive with a little bit of exploration at the bottom. Most organizations continue like this forever until they wink out and die. But ambidextrous organizations pass through. The model changes one more time, and this time the triangle flips internally. Now, the capstone of the organization is explorative, and the bottom part of the organization is exploitive. And then you have this synergistic arrow that goes around and around where new exploration feeds exploitation. You learn how to do something new. You put those tools in your toolbox. Now you have those new tools. It's that theory, and theory informs practice, informs practice informs theory, better theory informs better practice loop. So those are the stages of ambidexterity. Here's the interesting thing related to the question you just asked. Many organizations, when they get into that middle triangle where they're largely exploitive and occasionally explorative, they had a lot of innovative, creative, passionate people who helped to build that organization when it was in the upside down triangle, and they become marginalized and disenfranchised, and they leave the company. And then something in the environment happens, and they look around and they say, where's our explorative, innovative people that we used to have that built this company? Well, we marginalized them, or we disenfranchised them, or they got bored and they left, or they were punished and they left. One of the most interesting parts of my research is the work of James March. Have you heard of James March?
No, I haven't.
So Duncan came up with ambidexterity in 75, and he came up with this temporal ambidexterity. And then in 1991, a learning organization professor, James March, introduced learning into ambidexterity. And he said something in one of his seminal articles. He said something, talked about something very profound. I call them jackrabbits and tortoises. He talks about learners in your organization that are fast learners and slow learners. And what he discovered in his research was that the fast learners in your organization, that's what I call the jackrabbits, they get the promotions. They provide the biggest wins for the organization. They provide the biggest splash, but they contribute the least to the organizational codified knowledge. There's this cloud of knowledge, institutionalized knowledge above every organization. It's the cumulative knowledge of what the organization knows and the things that are passed down. The jackrabbits in the organization provide the least amount to that codified knowledge. They hop in, get what they want, and they hop out. They don't have time to teach others, mentor. They're your fast burners, type A people. Now, by comparison, the slow learners, the conscientious mistake makers, provide the most to the codified knowledge of the organization. They are actually the backbone of the organization, but they're the ones that are usually punished or marginalized. So you have these fast and slow learners in your companies, and you need to make sure that you celebrate the slow learners as well as the fast, those conscientious mistake makers that are teaching the organization. Otherwise, you could have a very Machiavellian kind of model.
Well, what you're
not even realize it.
What you're describing is, well, what you're asking is, what does it mean to learn? And in our modern sense of learning, which has been drilled into us in education, is you learn a list of rules, you learn a list of facts, and you're tested for that. And if you can present it on a test, and you pass. But historically, I mean, over millennia, The real learning is learning that you learn and then you incorporate into how you live. And that's a cultural learning. And I don't see that in a lot of companies. I don't see cultural learning. I see individuals doing that. I see them desiring that, but I don't see it happening as kind of a program of the company itself. Even if they have a learning officer, we're gonna have we're gonna have all these workshops, and we're gonna have these presentations. We're gonna do these things which lend the picture of what learning looks like, but we don't know how to take that information and then help our people to adapt that into their own life and their own sense of how they work at their desk, so that that learning becomes something that becomes part of the culture of the company.
Yeah, yeah, it's that performance over learning trap that you get into again. You
Yeah,
know, organizations will say, yeah, if you don't have a chief learning officer, as an example, right there with the performance officer or the CFO, um, telling you what needs to be done to optimize learning, then somebody in the C-suite is likely to say, this deal is a big money deal, or this deal is really important. We need to send in our star quarterback on this one. And then the next one comes along. Well, this one's important too. We need to send that person in again. And everybody else sits in the back of the bus. Um, and you start, you know, you get risk averse, and you won't allow, I'm thinking about the Ted Lasso series here. All the players had supportive opportunity to shine and grow. And in ambidextrous organizations, there are a couple of leadership models that work best. There's one called the complexity leadership model, and one called the ambidextrous leadership model. And each of those leadership models has three different types of leaders that run the organization. Some of them are formal, and some might be informal. But you'll have an administrative leader who is the one with the stopwatch in their hand, making sure that the trains are running on time. And then you'll have an enabling leader who is enabling and supporting the organizational members to grow and to be their best. And you'll have an entrepreneurial leader. Some of those are formal, some are informal, but it's a leadership model. What often happens is that the what often happens is that in organizations is that administrative leader becomes the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
yeah,
Everything becomes critically important. Everything's got to run in a mechanized manner, in a clockwork fashion. We don't have time to learn on this one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the department which gets most of the credit for that is HR.
Yeah. HR's got two functions. They are there is an educational training side of HR, and then there's an administrative, keep the boss out of lawsuits and make sure people know their benefits side, and they're getting
Compliance.
out of balance.
Yeah, my father was an HR guy, so I grew up with that, living at the dinner table every night, listening to that. That's why I didn't go into business.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I think you also watched Ted Lasso because I recommended. So, what did you think of the series?
It was amazing. Boy, the lessons in there. I could I could make a college curriculum out of that television show
Yeah,
out of that series.
you really could.
Yeah.
No. Um, well, what else is it? I mean, we haven't exhausted our places to go in terms of. Oh, we were going to talk about polymathy, but we're running out of time. We only got about 5 more minutes.
Oh my, are you kidding me?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. There's so many things that, so many places we could go, things that we could talk about.
We can come back another time and do that. But tell us what you're doing now. What's your what is the work that you're doing now, and how can people connect with you if they want to talk with you more about this ambidexterity model for organizations?
Sure, they could contact me on LinkedIn. You know, as far as I know, Ed, I am the leading researcher, scholarly practitioner, and research practitioner in organizational ambidexterity in the country currently. There are some big there are some big thinkers in past decades who championed ambidexterity, but I don't think they're um, doing it right now or talking about it as much, and they're certainly not talking about it in the ways that I'm talking about it. The interests that I have in this ambidextrous model are on the explorative side. Yeah, the exploitive side, those functions are important. Balance on making sure that exploration is in the mix. And the exciting thing is that without knowing it, without realizing it, I went from this book on organizational ambidexterity, which is at the organizational level, to this book, Unthink. All you have to do is nothing. And the thing that I didn't realize was that I'm still talking about these different worldviews of exploitation and exploration. And now I'm bringing more of some of my heroes, Dr. Ian McGilchrist and David Bohm and Robert Sapolsky and Rudy Tanzi. And I'm bringing it down. I'm bringing ambidexterity into the realm of contextual ambidexterity, the individual, cognitive self management, and balancing those two worldviews between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. I know that you know exactly what I'm talking about because you are also doing a lot of research with Dr. Ian McGilchrist.
Yes.
These are the things that I want to bring to organizations and to individuals to create a better world. This idea of balance and cognitive self-management and yeah, creating the type of world we all deserve.
I think the challenge, I would have said for the last 40 years that the challenge is at the center of the organization, but now I've shifted. I think the challenge is really with the individual person, because I think now that there are ways for people to um, to both be exploitive and exploratory, be an explorer as a person. I think, and if you're able to be that as a person, then you're going to become much more attractive to a business. But at the same time, you're also going to be able to sense what kind of businesses I do not want to work for. And so we are talking at one level about um, a, an issue of competition at the level of talent and of personal character, I would say. And I think
Hmm.
that's a growing dimension of this. It's not just that a business needs to add exploration to its mix. It needs to understand that it's got to have it in some kind of balanced state with the exploitative side of its business. And it's balance, and balance really is not a business process thing. It's really a human thing. And I think that's one of the interesting things about where we're
Yeah,
in the future is that all of this really is dependent upon us being better people.
yeah, it's about us being better people and us uh, providing a better service to others by managing ourselves, cognitively managing ourselves, being our best, so that I can be my best for you, you can be your best for me, um, and being that beacon that other people can follow and see. The the ancient Greeks had two words, ethos and logos. And logos stood for the rational mind and logic. That's where you get the word logic. And ethos was the ethereal, um, more of the right hemisphere of the brain, big picture in living embodied context kind of view. And they navigated their world each day, and they considered um, what was important to use every day was ethos.
Yeah.
They only pulled out logos very sparingly when they needed to do something. You know, you need to do a mental calculation or you need to concentrate on focus on something, you bring out logos.
Right.
Otherwise, you navigate your world with ethos. I think we've gotten ourselves into a world where it's completely flipped. And I say that we are not, in the last few centuries, we have been trying to follow this mechanized view of life in the world, but we are not imperfect machines. We are perfectly human.
Very well said. Very well said. And which is interesting to say that because there are those who do not see humanity as a valuable thing, or even as maybe as some of us believe is the height of all things that have ever been created. We're the no one else is asking questions other than human beings at the level that we're doing this. And so I think that much of what we're going to face in the future is not really about how we're going to organize ourselves, but how are we going to think about who we are, and even more so how we think about who we are together. And I think what you're doing is really it's really valuable because it gives all those legacy organizations a way of moving out of that trap that they found themselves in and moving forward into the future in a way where they can grow without sacrificing what they have created up to this point.
Yeah. There's another thing that I wanted to share with you, Ed, that was really eye-opening to me. So there's, constant talk about money and finance, and I heard, and the subject came up in many of your podcasts. Um, the the Greek god Asclepius, I think it's pronounced, he was the god of healing energy, and his symbol, two snakes coiled around a pole,
Right.
a staff, is used as the medical symbol, but it was also originally minted on the first coinage. And the profound thing that I got from that um, was that money can be thought of as energy. So Asclepius was the god of healing energy. So if money is considered as an energy and transferring money is the transfer of energy, where are we putting our precious energy? Where are we spending our energy? What are we propping up, inferring with this very powerful symbol,
Right.
money? You know, if you see it as a sign of energy, I'm going to purchase something. Do I want to purchase that energy? I'm going to give some money. Do I want to transfer that energy? Because money does create things. And, very interesting notion. What do
It,
you think of the idea of money as energy and the transfer of energy?
well, I think it causes us to ask the question, will the purchase of this object or this experience create energy within me that allows me to be um, more of myself or a better self as a result? I mean, I buy I buy a lot of books, and those books are forms of energy to me. And
Yeah,
um, I've been reading new stuff this week, and my head's spinning because I just saw a reference, and okay, I'm gonna check into this, and I checked it. Oh yeah, well this is really interesting, and so that energy. Let me come back and say it this way. I think what we should endeavor to do as people is seek out context where we're able to allow our best selves to come out. And I don't think they can come out without there being relationships where we are mutually supportive and respectful and trusting with one another. I think we need that. And without that, money just, we end up in a very exploitative environment where money is the only measure. And if we don't have those relationships, then I think, but if we have those relationships, if we can build those relationships, then all the money that we spend becomes a source of energy to bind that group together so that we can achieve things that we would never have thought that we could have done before. And I would say now that because of where we are,
right.
the world, we're at a point where we really need to be more together so that we can uh, do things that help recover some of the problems that we have created.
Yeah, and you can put it in your cross checks to ask yourself, "Hey, I'm working for this money. Is it is this good for me? Is it good for others? Good for my community, my family? Or I'm spending this money, or do I what do I want to support?" Life is not either or nor both and. Life is either or and both and.
I would agree.
Yeah, so we need to one hold on to that contradiction. So that's that open space of suspended judgment for what we might fill that room with, the unexpected. The realization that there is an energy side of us as well as a physical material side. And that part might not be seen. You might not be able to wrap a knuckle on it, but it needs to have a voice and be present in the room and honored. We need to honor it in each other and in ourselves for each other.
I think we're going to leave it at that. Eric, thank you for coming on. Thank you for watching all the Eddie Network podcast episodes. We got a lot more coming, and I think you'll find them interesting. And if you have people that you think I should have on here, I would love for you to introduce me to them. And we thank you for watching, and I hope that you will find something here that is worth commenting on. Please subscribe and hit the like button so we know that this is something you want to keep following. And we'll look forward to seeing you again here on the Eddie Network podcast for more interesting conversation. We thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.